so we've talked about working off the eye, that being the main thing we're going to do. We're going to try to get those cattle where they'll work more from the front and the side. Now, if you think about how your facilities are designed, does that allow you to position yourself in the right place? And that's the big question we get a lot of time is, can we do that? And the first few slides here, I'm not going to talk about the working area. It's just moving them from one pen to another. And most of us never think about how that impacts how the cattle flow through the chute. But every time we interact with a cattle, we have a chance to teach them good behavior or bad behavior. And so when we move them from one corral to the next, I can start teaching them that when I push them away from the gate, I want them to turn around and go the other way. Okay, so I can start training that. I can teach them to come by me. If I push them away from me and they turn around to come back, they all have to come by me. So I start training them to do all the things I'm going to need to do. I'll walk down their side to speed them up, the same thing I would do in the chute. And so every time we have a chance to interact with them, we do the same thing, but as we get further and further into the working and processing area, they can't take as much pressure. They can't remove as much pressure, and so they have to be able to take it. And I don't know how many of you have cattle rear up in your crowd alleys leading to your chute. If you get them in there and get packed pretty tight and they want to jump out, that's because they can't perceive any way to take that pressure off. This is actually a diagram of the corrals I'm going to be showing you some footage on. I'm not sure who laid those out, but there wasn't a straight fence in the deal. This one was formed in a V, and a lot of us like to use these V's because we think it controls the front of the cattle. But what it actually does is keep you from getting up here where you need to be in front. Okay, so these designs actually somewhat hinder what you try to do. This little tub system in here, I actually built what we'll call a return box in that where I can send cattle past the tub and then back into it. And so that's something a lot of people could do a lot of times to their tub system. It could be positioned out this way as well, but it changes the dynamics and flow and allows you to position yourself differently. The opening out of this corral is up here, and so every time somebody sees that, they wonder why in the world are you going the other way. But I will tell you, if you're by yourself, you can't push cattle out of this pen into that next one. But by pushing them away from that gate, putting enough pressure on them, we start getting the flow to turn and go the other way, then we can start building speed as well. Once again, putting pressure on the side. I said, we had a discussion in the break about horses, ATVs, and on foot. I like a horse mainly because I'm crippled and I grew up on horses. So I don't like walking all that much. ATVs work fairly good outside. Once you get in closer confinement, they don't. But we've set up the same scenario we had outside with these heifers. We've got flow started. There's plenty of them going through that little 10-foot gate, so you don't need to put too much pressure. And the other thing that's interesting to me is if I start the flow this way, these cattle, and here I get in too big a hurry, because they're flowing and I'm putting pressure on them and they get spreading out here. So once again, you're going to mess up all the time. Just figuring out how to fix it is the main thing. So don't get overly concerned about that. I finally realized I needed to just stop and let my flow go through that 10-foot gate. Because if you put too much pressure, they're either going to run back on you or go to hipping themselves on that gate, tear up your facilities. But notice all my motion's still going forward. If you'd have forced those cattle in there, their natural inclination is turn around and run out. But if it's their idea to go from one pen to the other, they'll flow in there and they'll stay, and they don't flow back on you. That's a big difference. Loading trailers is the same way, and I'll show you some footage of that in just a minute, looking at how that works. All right. Now, this was actually the day before when I was actually using the ATV. But it was 97 by the time we got to this point in the day. If you'll notice my shirt, I look like a fat boy's rendering. It was pretty warm that day. But I walked in here and I walked behind those cattle to push them down that little V area into the alleyway. And rather than act like I don't ever do stupid stuff, I left this clip in here. because I want to demonstrate this. We get them up here, it looked like flow was going to go, didn't it? Everybody started that way. And if you have 2 or 3 people back here, you can push them in that alleyway. Not that big a deal. But we've not taught them anything. We forced them into that alleyway. And finally I realized that I'm not going to be able to force that many heifers into that opening. But this cracks me up too. You have small victories. I got one, right? So I'm pleased with myself. Now this is the next clip is picking up right here. Now then, I'm going to push the cattle away like I should have done to start with. Start my flow coming around me to where I can have some of them following. I can then control the front. This little heifer, I stayed in too close to start with, but once again, straighten her out by pushing on an eye. Walk down their side, start more flow. The same set of cattle that wouldn't go in that gate, just by me changing my approach to them, got all of them I wanted to go. So it wasn't, when cattle aren't working, it's normally not the cattle's fault. It's the person who's asking them to go do something's fault. Now this is another, I normally cut this clip off a little bit, but these cattle are starting to balk a little bit. You can see I'm kind of just going back and forth across the alleyway. Don't stay in one spot or they'll turn and run back over you. But I go back to the pen, and once you bring a small group, and I like to do this, bring a group up the alleyway and put them basically as bait, if you want to call them that. Then it gets really easy to get the rest of them to go. So you can load your alleyway. Now here's another point when you're working cattle. If you put too many of them in the alleyway when you first start, by the time you get to those in the alley, they don't want to move. And so you have to put more pressure on them to get them to start moving again. But same thing, went to them, pushed them away from where we wanted to go, and I don't blame them for wanting to stay in that shade tree. I wanted to get there too. But when you're working like this, you can count how many you got going down the alleyway. If you want to cut them off, simply walk up their side, see how these stop. And that's how you sort them off very easy. So that's the right way to do it, and it's very easy to do it the wrong way. If you walk behind them, they just don't like it. Now this is the exact same tub that I have in that system we're going to talk about. There's a couple of things wrong with this, and if you're laying out tubs, and particularly in barn situations where you're under a roof in confined areas, there's a couple of things that we have trouble with. One, we're trying to put too much in too tight a spot. And so we don't have enough room to get the flow like we want. Now this little tub is designed to bring cattle in here. They're going to circle around and supposedly go back out that way, right? This would be going to a load out or a load and chute. The problem with this is that you always want this to come straight off of a tub system or a bud box, at least 2 animals' body length before it starts to turn. If you don't, they can't see a way out. And so they'll come around that corner, and a lot of times when they will balk. But if we put cattle in here and they start around that corner and we start swinging this gate around, what are we actually doing? How about drawing on an eye? As we start around there at that gate, we start drawing their eye this direction, and so the cattle will start to turn. Once they start to turn, they're not looking that way. They have to change their whole mind and look out the other eye to find that opening. So we're going to have some footage in a minute on how I make this one work a little better, but I don't use the crowd gate. Now if you're working the tub, you really need to work one of them from up here. Most of us get back here on this back gate and go to whipping on them and trying to force them out of that tub. What you want to do is get up here, draw their eye out of toward the opening, and then go down their side. Totally opposite of what most of us do. And that's what's showing here. He's using a flag to reach out in there and put more pressure from the outside of the tub. It's one thing about working on the outside of a tub, you're not close enough to them a lot of times to put the pressure on them you need to. This is a different little tub setup. I've got another diagram. I should move it in front here, but I like this little setup because you can put pressure on them here, get them to come around, work on their side, coming around that corner. But all of us are falling into this trap too. They flowed pretty good to right here. And no, I did not bend that gate, by the way. But they started balking as soon as they come around that corner and started getting close to that solid fence. So those of you that have to work cattle in a barn or have solid enclosed tubs, cattle don't want to go in them. And so they start trying to come back on you. I finally gave up on trying to use that tub at all, because if you put them in there and close that gate, they will not leave it. And so I just wind up letting them come back here, get on the side of them and start the flow this way. And then it gets very easy to get them to go in there. But by being on this side of them and not swinging that gate around, I can control their eye and push them on up into that corner. Now, what I do there, I wasn't paying attention. That one didn't have enough room to go in there, and I kept putting pressure on her. She backed up. So that was entirely my fault once again. But once again, you're working from the side. And this one here actually starts curving right at the opening. It's a terrible setup. But until we started working it like that, you couldn't hardly get cows out of that tub. Now, if this was my place, I'd take a cutting torch to that and take it out, and probably build a bud box right out here in front of it. This is talking about working the cattle once you get them in the lead up. And the other thing about getting cattle to go into that lead up to your chute on their own, you've got forward motion, nobody stopped them yet, they'll keep flowing through there better. If you force them in there, they're going to want out of it and they're going to balk very badly as you go through there. This is that working in triangles again. You start at the squeeze chute or the head gate, walk down their side, and go quickly. I see a lot of people, we tell them to go down their side and they'll walk down their side. If you do that, you're going to push them back. You want to take off and go fast. Walk down their side, and you may not have to be right up against it. You may be off at a distance. You have to learn to gauge that yourself. Gentle cattle, you can be closer. Wild cattle, you better back off a little bit. Now, for them to see you, what does that imply about this side of that lead up? Open-sided. All right, so many of us are gone solid-sided where cattle can't see us, and we can't put pressure on them when we need to. And so this doesn't work. If it's all solid-sided, you can walk up and down there all day long and it won't do any good until you reach over in there and pop them. So the best thing is to half sheet or no sheet on the inside, but I probably would solid side on the outside. Particularly in a lot of our enclosed and barn systems, you may have cattle sitting over here, and you don't want these cattle to be able to see them because they're going to stop. And so that would help by making this one solid, this one at least half sheeted or open sided. But once again, walk down their side, away from them, back to front, and do that path over and over. If you have a curved system, and this is the advantage of a curved system, you still start at the chute, you walk down their side, but you can cut across to the front. Okay, so you don't have to have that triangle. It saves a few steps to do that. So, but once again, you always go back to the front, walk front to back. I just talked about walking past them pretty quick. They need to be able to see you for that to work. We've just talked about the outside fences. Do any of y'all use catwalks? It's got the little walkway on the edge of the chute. That's real popular in our part of the world. They'll build a real tall crowd alley and then build a platform up on it so the person can walk on it. Makes no sense whatsoever. You could build the same height but leave it open where the person can stay on the ground. And I see, Pearson, a lot of companies sell tubs and stuff with catwalks on them. It's just crazy to do that. You're wasting material and everything else, so don't do that. These are the same heifers I just loaded a while ago. I was putting cedars in them that day, so I've edited all that out. Y'all don't need to see me sticking cedars in heifers and giving them shots. But when I walk out of that little heifer went to grazing. We just pinned them, run them through, put cedars. But notice as I let one of them out, and I do like the self-catch on these little manual chutes, because my flow is still going forward, all I have to do, I set my head gate, open that one, and it lets me walk down the side of the next one, draws them forward. Nobody's pushing those cattle forward. They're bringing themselves through that system. And it's not always going to work that smooth. And every time I show this video, everybody wants to know what how I use that dog, I don't know. That's not my dog. He happened to be there that day, and he was just standing there being quiet, so I let him just stay. I had company that day, so that's what the dog was for. I don't have anything against dogs. Rarely do I like one in the corral. I like them to bring stock to me. That way I can be on the front and control where they go. And a gathering dog is the kind of dog I like to have. I can send them out and bring stock to me. All right, this is at a demo we did in North Carolina years ago. Kurt Pate was there that time. Some of you may have seen Kurt while he's been here in Iowa. This is a bud box design. I'm doing something here you should never probably do, but I did it for another reason. All we're trying to do here is acclimate these cattle to this system. That's too many cattle in there for that length of lead up. Any kind of tub or bud box or whatever you have, you don't want to bring more cattle into here than will fit in that lead up and in your chute. This is not a holding area, but a lot of people use it that way. And if you fill your tub full, go work a few cattle and come back. Which way are your cattle in the tub facing? The opposite direction, right? So then you have to put all the effort in there, get them turned around, get them reoriented, and let them go through it. It'd be a whole lot quicker to leave them out of the tub and bring them through the tub and into the lead up. Now Kurt's job here is to get these cattle trained where they'll go past him. And notice this little heifer balks. She sees him, so all he has to do is walk down their side, sends them forward. Ruh-roh, what did he just do? Turn around, walk right back up their side, and what did he do? Stopped them. I love this video. Kurt's a really good hand, but I can give him fits about this one. Because he screws up twice in a row here, which he rarely does. So he walks down their side, so rather than walk back up here at an angle, he's down here and out of position when the next one balks. So that person that's working that outside has to keep going back and forth. You're going to have to go back anyway, so you might as well just make your pattern that way. But by getting these cattle to come through, notice he's out a pretty good distance coming down their side, and they don't flow out of there quite as well. So he probably should have come straight down their side again, has to reposition himself. And then this time, I would have probably taken my hand and run it down the back of that heifer from her shoulders to her hips as I walked by her. Kurt just pushed her off balance to get her to move forward, and that's where your touch comes into play. But you can reach your hand in there and run your hand down their back, and it's almost like you stuck them with a hot shot. It's amazing how fast that will send one of them forward. It's just a little more stimuli when you put that hand on them walking past them. All right, facility design is all about putting the people where they need to be, taking advantage of the natural tendencies of cattle, and so many facilities do not do that. You want to avoid as many distractions as possible. You don't want lighting to be an issue. You don't want the contrast on the floor to be an issue. If there's something there that keeps causing cattle to balk every time, figure out what it is and change it. But so many times, I've been in auction markets where there's been a gate swung the wrong direction for 26 years. They never took the time to re-swing it. You know, find out what's not working right, causing flow issues, and change it. From a cow-calf standpoint, and I'm fairly thrifty, I like to try to minimize my cost on facilities. And if I know how to work cattle, I can cheapen up my facilities quite a bit rather than having to engineer flow through a system. So there is two different ways to look at it. How many of y'all like to have a system like that? I hadn't found a spot flat enough and I would have put that sucker. Right? So that's part of it. You don't have that much area a lot of times to lay out a big old flowing facility. All these curved alleyways, why do we have curved alleyways? It goes back to that point I made about cattle wanting to go around you. So then we decided, well, we'll make curved alleyways to take advantage of the natural tendency of cattle to want to go around you. Well, we can fix that going around you, but either making it a straight alleyway or changing our position. So this is a lot more engineering than putting a straight alleyway. And they will flow great through there, don't get me wrong. But it's not necessary if you know how to work cattle right. So, but I can take any monkey and make them work through that. Because I can keep them out here on that catwalk. They can start at the front, they can walk down that alleyway with a flag, and they can get cattle to move forward. Packing plants were another area where Dr. Grant has done a lot of good work, and they don't have skilled labor at a packing plant. They have somebody that can walk down the alleyway. And that's what she's designed a lot of those designs for, and they work fairly efficient for people that don't have a clue what they're doing. They're told to go from this point to that point and do that repeatedly all day long, and you'll send cattle forward. Now this one really nice because they come around here, they hit a dead end, they turn around once again. This is a double entry alleyway coming out of there. Another thing that I see a lot of cow-calf producers, particularly smaller operations, will have a very short lead up to your chute. A lot of them 20 feet. And so then we'll store all our cattle in our tub or our box because we don't have enough capacity there behind the chute. So that's where I like the double alleyways. If you've got a small area in a barn, you can put a double alleyway, get twice as many cattle behind the chute and ready to work than you would if you had a single. So if I've got 30 feet, I can put a lot of cattle in 30 feet in a double entry alleyway. So that's something to think about. This one actually goes into 2 separate chutes. I don't think y'all are going to do that, but you could really work a lot of cattle that way. Once again, having some way to sort coming out the front, I do think is important. It doesn't have to be anything that elaborate. Once again, working from the outside, using flags and I'm not, if you have anybody that's afraid of cattle, don't put them in the alleyway with them. Let them work from the outside with some kind of flag or bag or something on a stick, because if they're afraid of cattle, cattle pick up on it. It puts them in harm's way and they wind up with liability issues and everything else. So don't force somebody to do that. Figure out a way they can stay on. Now, this guy's got a catwalk on the outside of the alleyway where he can be up high enough. Bud, that's actually Bud Williams. He's on a catwalk outside that tub as well. Allows you to be up higher. So sometimes a catwalk on a solid-sided tub or something may be an advantage if you can't change that solid side. I was looking for, I'm always scouring the internet looking for pictures that I can use for demonstration. This chute is one that has a handle that can control the head gate from the back of the chute. Great concept, because this guy could walk from the front of the chute down the side, get the cattle to go forward, close the head gate from back there in the back. Great idea. What's he doing? He's camped out on the handle. The bull's balked because he doesn't want to come past his point. He's in the wrong position. So this poor guy's fixing to hot shot the bull because this idiot's in the wrong way, in the wrong spot. So all of this is being caused by this. So once again, this goober needs to get out of the way. And most flow issues is related to people being in the wrong position. So anytime you have to go to pull a hot shot out, see what's causing the problem. We go to auction markets to do trainings, and we start looking for where they have hot shots stacked, because that's a problem area. And so then we can figure out what they need to do different to get to where they don't need to use that much electricity. So anytime you're using the hot shot, here's a couple of things. You probably covered this morning. Don't carry one in your hand. Don't ever let anybody carry one around. This guy would be fine if this hot shot was left over here. Why would that make a difference? Because this idiot would have to go get it. All right, I'm serious. Put it where that person has to leave the chute, because they're probably the one causing the problem in the first place. And when he takes the pressure off, this bull will move forward. And so always stack those hot shots at some distance away from the working area where whoever's needing them has to go get it. And it makes all the difference in the world. But if you carry one, you're going to be sticking it on something. You're going to be shocking the pipes, the cattle, sticking it between somebody's legs, whatever you're doing. You just don't use one of them right. So don't carry a hot shot. Personally, I think every operation should have one on hand. When you work livestock, if an animal were to go down in there, sticking them with a hot shot, or if they balk and everything else is set up right, it's much more humane to use a hot shot appropriately than it is to hit them with a stick, twist a tail, scream, holler, whatever you want to do. But before I use the hot shot, I'm gonna walk past them, just like we talked about doing. This guy, all he'd have to do is turn loose that handle and walk down the side of that chute. Send that bull forward. I put this is in a South Texas ranch. That's how they got their cows into the crowd alley. These were helicopter cows. They used 7 helicopters to gather these cattle out of the brush country, and then they were so bad that they wouldn't get in the pen with them. They got a front end loader. Now, that's not all Texas. In doing these clinics up in this part of the world, I've heard some of the best stories I've ever heard. There was a guy came to us in Springfield, Illinois, I believe it was. And he said he and his brother had a lot of trouble working cattle, and they were in their 40s. But apparently they fought all the time. And that spilled over into the cattle working, and the cattle wouldn't work. He said, we can't even get them down the alleyway to the tub. I said, really? He said, we just can't get them down there. I said, well, what do y'all do? He said, we mounted a 16-foot, the alleyway was 16 foot wide. They mounted a 16-foot gate on the front of their skid steer and used it like a plunger. And that's how they got their cattle down the alleyway to get them to work. That was one of my better ones I've heard. Another one was a guy had to put dual tires on his tractor with 3 fold-out gates on the front of it to get his fed cattle out of his feeding pens. They would actually try to jump in the tractor with him, so he'd put duals on there to keep it where it wasn't quite so bad. You know, and I'm thinking, what in the world causes this? But he had them fold-out gates once again to sweep the pens and get the cattle out. So when that's happening, somebody's not acclimating, somebody's not training the cattle right, and they're not getting them ready to work. And so that's something to think about as well. That's not what we want to do. Now, some of you may have a little system. This is what a one-sided V. Anybody have anything like that? There's a lot of them in our part of the country, very popular at one time. Now notice they have catwalks on both sides. Absolutely no reason, because these are open-sided, but they got catwalks. That's part of that tradition down there. And somebody's going to get on one. This guy's positioned in the right place to make this work. If he gets his horse and goes back toward them cows, they're going to come around. But what are they going to see when they come around the cowboy? We're going to have, just like that guy standing there with that bull, right? This guy's in the wrong place. For this to work right, he needs to be over here. So when those cattle come around the cowboy, he can help straighten their eye out and get them to come down the alleyway. So once again, if you have a system like this, you want to work from the outside of this V. Once again, once the cattle start coming, you can go down their side. And they actually work fairly well if you do that. Another one of those catwalks, make it solid, so then you have to get up over it. I just don't get it. And if you don't think those cattle will kick, just get behind one of them. You got a dog that's biting them on the legs, that's dangerous. You're teaching them to kick pretty bad in the chute, so keep that in mind. These boys are getting ready for war. They've all getting their hot shots out and they're ready to go to work, aren't they? If driving aids is your solution, we got a lot of work to be done. But that's what a lot of people do. And a friend of mine that was standing there in that picture with that front end loader and that helicopter cows, he went to a place one day and they brought 10 hot shots out and set them down before they started working. And he made comments, he said, you think you're gonna need all those? He said, oh, we got a lot more. And that kind of mentality gets you in trouble, so we don't want to do that. I'm going to put up some diagrams here and we're going to talk a little bit about how they work and why they might not work very good. This I pulled off a university facility design website. Y'all have noticed not many universities' engineering departments are doing anything anymore on agricultural, particularly livestock. But this little setup is kind of interesting. It's got a loader stack alley here. You can put cattle to come into a little tub system. Once again, the issues I see with this, if you leave this full of cattle, they're going to wind up wadding up down here on this end if you put too many. This will work if you don't load too many in there, probably 1 or 2 groups that might fit in there. It looks like they're gonna go to a solid wall, so they're not gonna wanna go forward out of that alleyway into that little tub. It's not straight coming off there for 2 body lengths before it starts turning. I do like the length of it, but it's just a little bit short. And I've never seen this one. I found this on the internet as well. There's a lot of places where something like this might work fairly well for you in a barn setup, to where you can actually take advantage of this curve system here. But there's several things about it that just crack me up. One, these cattle right here, you can see they're trying to stay away from these 2 guys. The cattle in the alleyway are trying to get away from them. There's just no place to go. These 2 guys are oblivious to the fact those cows are reacting to them behind. You got cattle going this way down the chute. You got cattle you need to be bringing this way. So you got counterflow, and they're not going to want to do that. So this side of this alleyway actually needs to be solid. So that would help. This little V crowding area probably would work fairly well. You could bring them straight out of that alleyway into here. Well, what they've done, they've loaded that. So all that's crowded in there, and look which way the cattle are oriented. And so they got too many in there. They're already turning the wrong direction. So every time you need to put something else in here, you're going to have to force these to turn around. So don't put them in there. Notice these cows have their head up. She got her head up looking out the outside, so she stopped her forward motion. Now that's something about a cow. If you've got the sides solid enough to where they can look over them, it's going to stop their motion. So either make it solid enough they can't see out on that side, or leave it open and realizing you've got some distractions, may be an issue there. So that's another concern about this cow can see out. And this is another video clip to show you why that's important. But once again, cover that right there. And I like PBR bullfighters. I'm amazed at what they can do. But this is to demonstrate how getting one of them's head up, head raised, will stop their forward motion. Watch what this little idiot does. See how many of you young bucks might do this. But as that bull's about to plow this guy down, he jumps on his head and he throws his head up and he stops his forward motion. That's pretty handy, isn't it? And that's their whole job, is to get the bull's head up. If you listen to any of the PBR bullfighters, their job is to get their head up so they won't run over the guy. And so that's just, I like this, just entertaining once again to me. But then the other thing to watch is the other 2 guys. They are drawing on the bull's eye. Is that one guy's flying in the air, another one comes in and draws his attention to him and draws him away from that guy. Right here's Frank Newsom, the bull's looking at him. So once again, he's drawing his eye. He's going to change the direction by doing that. So it doesn't matter how you're working this. Then watch this guy. He draws his attention away from that one. And in a minute, he actually makes a full circle and turns the bull back the other way. But just the simple things like that, and understanding how those animals are going to respond and what their natural tendencies are. You know, these guys understand behavior. If not, they'd be on the ground a lot, wouldn't they? So they know how to draw that eye, get out of the flight zone, a lot of different things on these bulls. So to me, they're really an interesting group to watch and study. This is the exact setup I had a while ago that I was complaining about the solid wall and having trouble getting the cattle to go down there and around. And I'll show you what I would do to fix it. I talked about using a bud box or something on that end that would actually work, but that solid side, the lack of visibility leaving there is an issue. This is a setup that several people are manufacturing. Foremost has one, Preferred Manufacturing has one. There's 2 or 3 other, Titan West makes a sweep like this. It's very simple and would fit in a barn setup pretty easy in a confined area. But it's designed to bring cattle in and they turn around and then come right back out. So it's just a small scale little system that actually works pretty darn good. I've got some video of it in a minute. What you could do is something like this. If you wanted a sweep tub, you could actually install one of them in that same kind of area, take all this junk out that doesn't work and make that work better. All right, now back to this tub we talked about earlier. You bring cattle in this direction, their natural flow is going to be this way. So where would the logical opening, should that be in that tub? It should be down here, right? What would actually make this work better is this come on around and it actually kind of come down this way. That way you've got them coming all the way around and they don't try to turn back past the pivot post, which is what they do in these tubs. So once you get cattle in there, you have to quit pushing on the back end. You need somebody on the front to draw their attention forward, and that will turn their head to look at that opening. Or something else I'm going to show you in a minute. If you want to work this on the ground and back here, as the cattle come in, you can actually step inside right here and put pressure on that eye and push an eye around and get them to go into that. That's the exact setup we had talking about a while ago. So this is the way I work this little setup, and you might look to see if you've got an opportunity to do that, to build one of these return boxes out beside it. It's not truly a bud box, but it allows the cattle to get in close proximity to the tub and then turn around and come back and repositions you in the right position. So once again, teaching them to come around you, go by you, everything we do is training cattle to work. Every time you move them. All right, so this deal, they go to the back of it, and it actually needs to be a little bit deeper, but it works fairly well. Cattle will start to flow around, and now I'm in a position I can control the front, put pressure on the side, keep them from turning. And it works pretty good. The only thing I haven't been able to make it work like that's on a bucking bull that fought real bad. But we closed the gate on him and just stood up on the side, and it actually worked pretty good. This is a bud box. A bud box is designed to take advantage of the 5 basic instincts of a cow. One, they want to come back. If you put pressure on them to go somewhere, they're going to turn around and come back on you. When they do, you would be in a position that they would circle around you, put you on the front and on the side. They can follow one another out of that box and then come down that alleyway. So it's a very simple system, works very good if your cattle work correctly and you will position yourself right. Because if you try to drive them out of a bud box, it will not work. You have to guide them out of a bud box. The cattle come in, you want them to circle, and this is going to load out to a truck load out or trailer in a working chute down here. But to just circle the cattle around, and then the person is working right in this area. If you get off down here, the cattle are going to circle just like they would in a tub. So that's the biggest complaint. And then people make these too big. In fact, I came to a place in Iowa, the guy had put in a bud box and was fussing about the bud box. Didn't work. When I show up to his place, his bud box is 40 feet wide and 42 feet long. A bud box should be about a 12 by 24. So he lost all control once he brought all the cattle. The other thing he was trying to do was to put all the cattle that he needed. He'd put 30 or 40 head in there so he didn't have to go back and bring more. That's not how these work. And so if you're doing it that way, you're going to cuss it. It's not going to work very good. This is a bud box design and open. We helped put this in for some people. You know, they always talk about don't have shadows and contrast and everything else. If the cattle are working for you and responding to you, that's not that big a deal. Now, there's a couple of things to do. I've got to get all of these cattle starting to face the same direction. If I don't, they're not going to flow. But see, now we're started. Once they start, I put pressure on the front, and then I actually make a mistake here. I've got really good flow, and I'm slowing them down so they don't jam up, but I back up too far. And then I get too much, they start jamming up, and then I lost my flow. So now it's interesting, these black heifers are kind of goofy. So they take a little different. But once we again get flow started, notice this wants to leave. All I had to do is back up and take some pressure and draw her eye back to the other heifers. And everything flowed on the truck. The truck driver's standing right here. That's all I ask him to do, is stand on the outside, and if the cattle balk, to walk down their side. They went all the way up into the front compartment and the top deck. Nobody had to touch them with a hot shot. Nobody's in there right now. None of them are running off. Remember what I said a while ago? If it's their idea to get on there, they stay. This truck driver had to come around and get on his truck, go up there and close the partition gate. But nothing came off. It's really interesting to watch the difference. This one, the guy's using the horse. First time he'd ever worked a bud box. One of the best cowboys I know, but he'd never been in one of these, so he was just playing. His horse is real, what we'd call cowy. He'll watch a cow, and so he actually makes too big a move sometimes. I just wanted to point that out. Now, if he comes in here, if he goes this direction, any cowboy in our part of the country is going to want to turn and face the cattle. But look what happened when his horse turns real fast. Turns every cow in their back. Loses all of his motion. He got cattle going every which way. He's not getting anything done. So he tries to ease a few up here, but these are going back and these are not going to go. So until he gets right, this ain't going to work. All right, now he starts more flow coming around. He turns slower, has one ready. Now he did almost too late putting his pressure on, but starts the first one. It's like you flush a toilet when they start. Y'all notice how quick they'll come out of there? Well, once they start, and then he takes a little pressure off right here, he probably didn't need to, but once again, he's stepping in there. Watch my truck driver. He actually takes a step or two here. First time he moved was with this deal. But once again, the cattle are walking on there very calmly. There's not been a hot shot used. Nobody's hollering. I should have turned the sound up. All you can hear is their feet on the ground. So it's really interesting to watch how they work. But that's a bud box. Very simple design. Anything about a bud box, this has to be open, this far end, because you want them going to daylight and you want them coming fast. Y'all notice we had them at a trot? You want them to come in there at a pretty good clip. Most people will make this gate solid. In fact, they've actually changed that and put a solid gate there at the front of the bud box where they can't see back in the alleyway. And they've got those cattle where they'll come out there very quickly, because the faster they go in, the quicker they're going to turn and come out. So that's part of what we do there. We've already talked about driving aids. If you use one of them, it's an extension of you. And so you have to be aware of where it's at. I used to carry a sorting stick all the time. In that little tub system I was talking about, the return box, I was standing there by that pivot post one day and my cows were coming around me and the sorting stick was hanging straight down about a foot away from my body. And I noticed every cow was flinching when they come by me. I thought, reckon that sorting stick's what's causing that? I set it down, never been another cow flinch, and I haven't used one since. But just that, it was still as a mouse hanging straight in front of me, and it was affecting every cow that come by me. So if you use one of them, realize anywhere you have it, it's going to impact those cattle. The paddles, I like paddles if you use them right. We were in Missouri at an auction market, and there was a guy there sorting cattle really good using two paddles. I might get more animated. He'd take one paddle and he'd reach around and start one of them out of the group, and then use his other paddle to help guide them on out. Well, for some reason, he let the paddle in his left hand start drifting off down to his right side. Well, he'd reach over here with his paddle and start them around, and as soon as this heifer would see this other paddle, she'd turn and jump back in the group. Well, he did it 3 times, and he finally got mad enough, he raised both paddles to whack her with it, and she walked out right past him. So every bit of that problem he was creating himself because he wasn't aware where the other paddle was, because it's a presence, and you have to know that. So keep that in mind. Flags, sorting sticks. And if you're not careful with flags, you can put a lot of pressure on cattle with a flag, particularly if it's a big one. We see a lot of feedlot guys that will make streamers and they look like big old pom-poms. And if you go to shaking one of them, you can scare a big group of cattle with those things, so you have to be careful with them. All right, this is loading a trailer. And this goes back to BQA principles and everything else once again. This is a little bud box I just built on the end of the alleyway. This is the first time I'd ever used this particular bud box. We just used the gate, made a little makeshift one here. I put my daughter up in the tractor bucket. She wasn't real stable, so a little shaking going on. But the whole idea is, once again, to get them to come around you, put pressure on their side. The interesting thing to me is these cattle will just keep going forward. As they go into the trailer, most everybody right about here is worried about something coming off. But if you'll watch these heifers just keep walking forward. Go all the way to the front of the trailer and you can shut the petition gate. Now I do like shutting petition gates in trailers so you don't get all the cattle stacked up on the back. You're better off to close every one of them, but for every gate you close, that's one less head you can haul from a cow standpoint. Now move the heifers up here behind them, but to load the back 2 compartments, and I did not split this group, but this little heifer is really interesting. As I put pressure on her stopper, but once again, you pay attention to what you're doing. But once again, the flow coming out of these is pretty easy to start, and this is where I'm talking about getting them to switch eyes or using the heifer to turn the whole group out of the corner. I'm not going to turn those groups. I'm going to let that heifer that started that motion, she started the whole turn, and that way it's not a big deal to them. But, you know, I've talked about solid gates, solid sides, what would work best. None of the bud boxes I have a solid side on them anywhere, even the gates, and they work fairly well. We load semis out here too, and it works pretty good. This box is not big enough to load an entire compartment on a truck, and so that if I was doing anything, I'd have one that was probably 30 foot long to load a full top or bottom deck, so you can get more cattle in there before you start the flow out. Here we just stage them where we can bring the second group in. Because they don't have the backflow, we can bring half of them at a time, and it works pretty good. That's something, if you're working cattle inside a barn and taking them, that contrast, that needs to be changed. You can do that with lighting or cut a hole on the other side of the building where you've got light coming to it. And so if we can use lighting to draw cattle quite a bit, you wouldn't want it shining back toward them. You'd want to shine it away from it where you wouldn't have shadows so bad. But I don't have that big an issue with things with streamers. These drop down, anybody use those backstops? A lot of people like them, and if you get them set right, they're all right, but don't put one of them right at the back of the alleyway. Because if you got cattle coming out of a tub or a box and they go to balking at that, it's going to create a problem. If you have one there, lift it up before you start cattle through. Once they get started, you can let it down and they'll keep going, but that first one will normally balk and you have to put too much pressure. This is my cow with the camera. What's she stopping and looking at? All the shadows, contrast, and other nonsense. She stops and looks at everybody going down through there and goes on in the chute. They wouldn't let me catch her in the head gate. They're afraid I'd break their camera, but it wasn't that big a deal. Mentioned this little chute or crowd alley a while ago, bring them in. This thing works pretty darn good. One is you bring the cattle in and you close the gate, you're basically going down their side, and so it starts the cattle as you bring the gate. It's very different than most tub systems. Now Kurt stays on the latch end of it too long and he winds up getting them stuck here and has to back them up and start over. Now the other good thing about this video, notice all he's doing is working up and down their side. Preferred, this is actually on their ranch there where they manufacture stuff, but by walking down their side you can send all those cattle forward. So it's very simple design, but that used to be solid sides on both sides. As they started working with us doing these videos, they finally realized it would be better off to take that sheeting off, so they changed it to an open side on the side where they're working. Keep this in mind, if you're going to make some changes, it's going to take a change in attitude, change in management, change in philosophy, and a pretty good commitment to change. Because we are hard-headed in this industry. There's an understatement of the day right there. I go by this philosophy. In fact, I'll let y'all read that one. And then I like this one. Sometimes we think we're right when we may be the wrong one. Just keep that in mind. And as we look at more and more public scrutiny of what we do, we don't have to change the way we do it. And I love that last line. Change is not required, survival is not mandatory. And so if we want to do things right and do things that are going to be acceptable, we may have to make some change. And nearly every operation I know has got room for improvement. Coach Gene Stallings, he was a pretty good football coach. I like listening to him. He has a good presentation on every day. He encouraged his teams to get better. Didn't matter how good you were, you strive to be better and better every day. So I don't care how good we are, we can get better.